In response to my last video testing out the PC system requirements on Borderlands 4, were they really as demanding as they said? Where I had some thoughts on the optimization, I've been getting some really helpful feedback, like just buy a 5090 and quit crying. So we put in the 5090, it's on the 9800X 3D based system, and we're gonna find out what is actually the experience at the extreme high end in Borderlands 4. So this is my first time loading it up. Again, it does compile shaders as you enter a new area, but as I saw on my other systems, I was still getting some frame time spikes, which again, we have the frame time graph up in the top left corner of the screen over here, where if you see spikes like that, that usually indicates a stutter. Now that was just ones because we just loaded in, but that's where you can kind of keep your eye out for. So currently I'm getting 40 FPS on my RTX 5090. So I bought a 5090 and I'm getting 40 FPS. So that completely solved the problem. Oh, now we're getting like 37. Here, let's run some averages for this combat and see how it comes out. Okay, yeah, we're getting around 38 average. The middle FPS number there is the cumulative average since I start the run. The one on the right is the 1% lows, which are actually below 30. Now, I do want to be clear, though, that this doesn't necessarily mean by itself that a game is completely unoptimized, because what this is doing is just completely maxing out the game at 4K. That being said, I do think that a lot of people are going to have trouble accepting that a cartoony sort of art style only runs, below 30 FPS, sorry, below 40 FPS in combat on an RTX 5090 and a 9800X 3D. But again, that is completely maximum graphics settings, so I do think it's only going to be fair to also check in on reducing graphic settings. What if we're not running native 4K? Because again, that was 4K resolution. I had upscaling disabled, so that was native 4K resolution, and it was at the maximum graphics preset for the game. Which I won't say out loud as it's a family-friendly show and I have no idea how YouTube reacts to certain words and monetization and recommendations and whatnot. Anyway, so we are at the maximum graphic settings in the game, and we already saw below 40 FPS on the RTX 5090, but that's if you're running at native rendering resolution. Now, it's only fair to say that DLSS, we're talking the new transformer model, this does, especially at the quality setting, look as good or sometimes better than a native TAA, not better than native DLAA. So I will go ahead and kick it on, and I do think frame rates will be nice. I just dropped my weapons because I found out in this game my benchmarking hotkey for erasing a benchmark run that I just did is the end button, and in most games that's not used, but apparently in this game it throws down your weapons. So there's that. Now, speaking of weapons and my ability here, I'm staring at the frame rate counter, so don't judge my aim too harshly. I haven't really been paying any attention to this game other than the frame rate numbers. Let's go ahead and restart that benchmark run. So we're now looking at maximum settings at 4K, other than it is using DLSS quality rather than running at native 4K. Does this gun really only have 3 bullets before it has to reload? That does not seem ideal. Anyway, looks like we are kind of in the mid-60s FPS range at the moment. Also, I really don't like my mouse sensitivity settings right now for this game, but I'm too lazy to waste time changing them. So, there is that. Let's try a different weapon, though. I'm not a fan of how often that thing has to reload. There was a frame time spike there, so if you look in the top left corner, do you guys see the frame time blip and that the 1% lows momentarily dropped to 3? Ooh, there was another massive frame time spike. So we're now at 4 on the 1% lows, very noticeable stutters in combat. So once again, I bought an RTX 5090. I actually did receive it as a review sample, to be clear. But in response to the comment, does buying a 5090 completely fix all problems with this game? No, I mean, at running upscaling, I can get over 60 FPS average, but I do still have stutters, and the 1% lows do drop into these single digits when those stutters take place. So, I think that's important to note. Anyway, now the kinds of stutters we're getting here, I do believe are primarily shader compilation. So even though the game does have a shader pre-compilation, in Unreal Engine, it tends to not catch every possible shader. which then means that you have, hey, this gets better DPS. Let's replace this stupid pistol thing with a shotgun. Anyway, yeah, I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that some shader compilation doesn't get taken care of. Now, if you've been playing the game for several hours and you feel like it's smooth, usually shader compilation stutter improves over time, because once you've seen a shader once, it has been compiled, and so it won't stutter again the next time you see it. Where's my shotgun? Wait, is this the shotgun? Wait. I feel like this shotgun thing should feel more shotgunny. I don't know. Somehow this doesn't feel very shotgunny. Anyway, whatever. We'll just keep rolling. I'm only halfway paying attention to the gameplay anyway. So, yeah. So, in other words, if the shader compilation is not complete, the pre-compilation, then buying the best hardware in the game doesn't it doesn't solve that problem. Also, again, we're using upscaling to only get a little over 60 FPS average. So there's also that. Now, again, that being said, we are on the maximum settings, but it is an RTX 5090 and a 9800 X3D. This is the kind of PC that you would kind of expect to be playing at maximum settings. Now, this kind of art style does work really well with upscaling, again, if we are being fair. So I'm going to go ahead and go to performance mode upscaling. This is rendering internally at 1080p, but then using that to output a very 4K-like image. But that's what this is doing. No, don't reset. Press F. There, apply settings. There we go. Okay, so we've applied DLSS performance mode. I'm going to reset the frame rate averages. So DLSS performance mode, we are currently at about 83, 82 FPS, so we're around the low 80s. Let's do a little bit more combat and see how this goes. But again, I have to stress enough, this is an RTX 5090 and we're on performance mode DLSS. So the maximum graphic settings in this game are incredibly demanding. They are very, very difficult to run at high frame rates. We do seem to be still mostly GPU limited rather than CPU limited, although the GPU utilization sometimes goes as low as like 95% or so. So we will want to keep an eye on that, because even though this is a 9800 X3D, this game is also incredibly CPU demanding. Wow, my aim is awful with this thing. I don't like the recoil on this gun. It seems a little bit, seems like I'm supposed to maybe wait for a second for the recoil to reset. So should this be like a tap shooting situation? I don't know. Oh, fell down a hole. Anyway, so yeah, the point here is the performance. We're in the mid 80s, but we're running at performance mode DLSS at 4K at the maximum settings. Now, of course, we should probably also test out settings below the maximum settings, but really on a 5090, I don't usually need to. Even Cyberpunk's like RT Overdrive path tracing mode, when running in DLSS performance mode, I think usually has a bit higher performance than this. So if you want like a comparison point, that's certainly something to think about. But what we're gonna do now is go to full screen for a second so that I can then adjust the rendering resolution. I wanna look at what if I have a 4090 on a 1440p display. So we're switching to 1440p output resolution, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn DLSS back off again. So upscaling is disabled, so we're just looking at maximum settings at a native 1440p resolution on a graphics card that costs about $2,500 by itself, and the entire PC is at least another over $1,000 above that with the CPU and everything. Notice that we are over 60 FPS. Here, let me reset the frame rate counters here. But the 1% lows are not. We're still getting some stutters in the frame time graph. The 1% lows are 39 currently, and we're barely in the mid 60 FPS range at maximum settings, native 1440p, on an RTX 5090. So again, yes, I could turn down the graphics settings, but on a 5090, I mean, again, this is similar to like running native path tracing in Cyberpunk. It gets around 60 FPS on a 5090. So that's the kind of performance level that we're talking about here. Wait a minute, I have to fight for my life. Apparently I died. I have not been paying attention to the combat. Like, I am basically randomly clicking things. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and respawn there. Yeah, so that's the kind of performance level that we're talking about. Again, at maximum settings, like I said, it's only fair to also consider not playing at maximum settings. But again, people don't buy a 5090 to not play at maximum settings usually. So anyway, we should talk. All right, now let's go ahead and adjust the settings. So, okay, what if even on an RTX 5090, I wanted to use DLSS, even on a 1440p display rather than 4K. So DLSS quality, let's kick that on our 1440p output, and let's go ahead and reset the frame rate counter. So DLSS quality, 1440p, otherwise maximum graphics settings. Currently just running through this area with no enemies, and we are close to 100 frames per second. So it is looking like it's getting more demanding now as we round this corner here. So actually now in this area, it's a little bit more demanding. I'm gonna reset the frame rate counters for this kind of area. Ooh, wow. Also, look, this fire's not ray traced. Look, I assumed with this level of performance that like we're essentially like almost in a path tracing mode, like everything's being ray traced. Look, that fire's on screen. It has a reflection when it's on screen, but when I look down, look, that fire is not reflecting there until it enters screen space. So still we have some things that are still just screen space reflections. It's not even everything being ray traced at this performance level. So again, though, I want to be clear. I think the game looks very good. Like, this does look very good. So you're not getting nothing for this level of performance. So do not get me wrong. The game looks good. It just is extremely demanding. And even buying a 5090 doesn't mean you just like max the game out at native resolution and high frame rates. By the way, big frame time spike there again. Do you see that? I felt it quite a bit when that explosion happened. So still, even after playing this long in this area, still getting some shader compilation issues that have not been completely taken care of. Now, average frame rate's doing a lot better though. So yeah, guys, just buy a 5090 to play at 1440p upscaled. That's all you need to do. I went ahead and reset that because we are going to change graphics settings again. So what I want to look at now is what if I played this game on a 1080p display with an RTX 5090. So what does that look like? So we are going to go down to a 1080p display, and we will go back to native resolution. So again, if you got a 5090 for 1080p, you would certainly hope you don't need upscaling. So we are going to turn that upscaling off. Looks like the resolution change has messed with the color scheme on my capture card. Let's Alt-Tab in and out again and see if that solves that problem. That usually fixes it. Okay, is the capture repaired? It is repaired. All right, so we are, double check here, we are at maximum settings, no upscaling, 1080p resolution on the RTX 5090. Let's kick in the frame rate averages and get some benchmarking here. All right, looks like we are not in the triple digits. We're in the mid 80s. So it is looking like we are, like I said, an RTX 5090 is not able to average in the triple digits at 1080p native resolution at maximum settings in this game. So just be aware, the game looks good at its maximum settings, but it is incredibly demanding to get there. And you have to wonder if there would have been a way to achieve similar graphics with better performance. But let's go ahead and actually take a look at that. So what if we reduce the graphics settings? I think that is only fair. So I've noticed that in a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games, the high settings are very similar in graphics to your eye to the maximum settings, but they have much better performance. So we are going to go ahead and switch to high settings, and I think we should probably restart the game in order to make sure they applied properly. It does seem to trigger additional shader pre-compilation when you change graphics settings, so I do think that it is a good idea to restart the game, because it might, so if you've been changing graphics settings without restarting the game, it maybe didn't catch some of those shaders that you otherwise would have caught with the restart. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump back in. We are on the 5090 now with high graphics settings. I have gone back out to 4K though. So we are now native 4K resolution again, but this time we are doing it at the high preset rather than the maximum preset, which, like I said, in most Unreal Engine 5 games, high tends to be a much more optimal compromise between graphics settings and frame rate. So looks like we are almost averaging 60 FPS here. Looks like about 59 currently. Let's do a little bit more running around and combat and whatnot. Again, the graphics look pretty nice, like the lighting here and everything. So I do want to make sure that nobody takes the wrong information away from this video. I don't think that this game looks bad. I just think that it is incredibly demanding performance-wise in order to achieve that visual target. Now, whether or not you think something is optimized has to do with whether you think it achieved its visual target in an optimal way. Now, I'll leave that up to graphics programmers, people who work with Unreal Engine 5 in detail and know more about that than me. But I will say that the fact that we get shader compilation stutters and things like that, even on super high-end hardware, certainly to me doesn't mean that things were maybe done in an optimal way, at least in certain ways. And I would certainly expect an RTX 5090 to have higher performance than it does, especially to try to achieve high frame rates. Now, again, like I said, it seems like we're able to average around 60 FPS running around this area at native 4K on the 5090 at the high graphic settings rather than the maximum graphic settings. Now let's look at what if we did upscale. So let's go DLSS quality at the high graphic settings in this area. Looks like that's pushing us up into the mid 80s or so. Let's run around a bit more. Maybe get into some combat here, see how that plays out. Yeah, kind of mid 80s or so, again, using upscaling at the quality level at the high settings on a 4K display. Again, so like, yeah, I'm having a perfectly reasonable experience performance-wise. Overall, it's just thinking about the fact that it's taking a 5090 in order to do that. So let's kind of respawn here with more aggressive upscaling. So maybe we'll go performance mode upscaling at 4K before we try dropping down to 1440p at the high settings. So let's go to performance mode upscaling. So performance mode upscaling, high settings, 4K output, monitor resolution. And let's see if we can actually get some higher frame rate sort of experience at these settings. Again, as we change settings, it seems like there's dynamic weather and time of day going on here. So not all of these settings are like an apples to apples comparison to each other, since the environment is changing, the enemies in the environment are changing, all of that. So just do keep that in mind if you're trying to say like these settings are this much or more or less performant than these other settings. And by the way, I think that the fact that this game has the dynamic time of day and weather effects is something that is better done through things like Lumen, which do a better job at that type of environment than something like, again, don't judge me, I'm not paying attention to the combat. I'm literally like looking at the camera and my recording feed. Anyway, in other words, why not bake the lighting? Well, if you bake the lighting, then you get probably a lot more performance here. Big frame rate spike there again, by the way. Big frame rate spike. So yeah, you probably get a lot more performance here if you bake the lighting. Then, though, it probably doesn't look as good when you're doing the dynamic time of day and weather effects. So there is a trade-off there. Now, personally, I've never found the super dynamic time of day and weather effects to necessarily like make me enjoy a game a lot more. Maybe that's just me personally. I don't know if I'm in the minority on that one. So, again, so there is pros and cons to this type of thing. Is there something in this box that would be like a better weapon or something? No, it's just like ammo and stuff. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and change graphic settings again. So let's go down to, we're gonna go back to native resolutions. We're gonna turn DLSS off, but we're gonna drop to a 1440p display. So I gotta switch to full screen in order to get back to 1440p as an option. And let's try out native 1440p at the high preset on the RTX 5090. So RTX 5090, looks like we are around 90-ish FPS here at native 1440p at reduced graphic settings. We are at least, I think, 2 or 3 notches down on the graphics presets, but it is native resolution. But yeah, definitely not a triple-digit experience, although we're close. Let's see if we, and again, it's on a 5090. Let's go to DLSS quality on 1440p output, which on a 5090, I would certainly hope I don't have to upscale more aggressively than that on a 1440p display. Looks like that's getting us to closer to like, over 100 FPS for sure, close to 120. So if you want to play at around 120 FPS in this game, it looks like all it takes is an RTX 5090, 2 or 3 notches down on the graphics presets, and using upscaling. So that's all it takes. So yeah, it is true. The commenter was correct. Just buy a 5090 to get 120 FPS. You just need to turn down the graphic settings as well and use upscaling. That's all it takes. So really, that's kind of my issue here. Is I just feel like the amount that we have to turn down the graphics on a 5090 to get like triple-digit experience seems a little bit unreasonable to me. Again, game does look pretty nice though. So there is that. Okay. Let's check out one more thing. So let's again turn upscaling off and let's try out native 1080p resolution before we go. So we'll go to native 1080p high settings on an RTX 5090 and 9800 X3D. And we will see how that goes. So yeah, native resolution, high settings, 1080p, and let's run around like this. So it does look like we can hold over 100 FPS. So if you want to play this game at reduced graphic settings by a few notches on a 1080p display and consistently hold in the triple digits, other than the stutters, you just need to buy a 5090. That's all it takes. So I think that maybe that's a good place to kind of wrap up the video. So what's my thoughts on just buy a 5090 and quit crying? Well, if you want to play in triple digits at 1080p native resolution at high graphic settings, a few notches down from the maximum settings, it is true. You could just buy a 5090 to do that. And at 1440p, if you just use upscaling at the high preset, you can also be in the triple digits. And also at 4K, if you want 4K 60 native, high preset on a 5090 does get you there, and using a bunch of upscaling can get you into the triple digits. So yeah, absolutely, on a high-end PC, you can totally have a pretty good experience on the 5090 if you're willing to make some graphics compromises and use upscaling. That's generally not the case on a 5090. Anyway, so yeah, that is the performance on the 5090. You can absolutely enjoy this game on a 5090, other than the stutters and shader compilation issues, which are still present. I hope all of you have an excellent day.